When we think of the heroes who changed the course of World War II, we often picture soldiers storming beaches or pilots in dogfights. But what about the African-American drivers who navigated treacherous roads to deliver crucial supplies across war-torn Europe? Their story has been largely erased from our history books, yet without them, the Allied forces might never have secured victory. In the next few minutes, you'll discover how a segregated unit of black drivers became one of the war's most decorated service groups. The D-Day landings had succeeded beyond expectations, but Allied commanders soon faced a stark reality. Victory had created its crisis. As Allied forces pushed rapidly across France, they left their supply bases far behind on the Normandy beaches. By late summer 1944, this gap had stretched to nearly 400 miles, a logistical nightmare that threatened to bring the entire offensive to a grinding halt. Military success depends on a simple but unforgiving equation. Armies advance only as far as their supplies allow. The lightning pace of the Allied advance had shattered conventional supply mechanisms. Railways remained damaged from bombing campaigns. Ports were either destroyed or still under enemy control, and the few operational supply lines couldn't handle the massive volume needed to sustain the momentum. The scale of consumption was staggering. By August 1944, General George Patton's Third Army alone required approximately 800,000 gallons of fuel daily, enough to fill a line of tanker trucks stretching for miles. This was just one army in just one supply category. When combined with ammunition, food, medical supplies, and replacement parts for vehicles and weapons, the total requirement created a supply crisis of unprecedented proportions. Senior Allied commanders realized they faced a critical decision point. Continue the advance without adequate supply lines and risk running out of essential materials in hostile territory, or pause to establish proper supply chains and potentially lose the advantage of German forces in disarray. Neither option seemed acceptable in the urgent push toward Berlin. This supply emergency demanded an innovative solution. General John C.H. Lee, commander of Services of Supply, proposed a massive truck convoy system that would operate continuously, day and night, creating an unbroken supply chain from the beaches to the front. The routes would be marked with distinctive red balls as visual indicators, giving birth to the operation's name, the Red Ball Express. The concept was elegantly simple yet logistically complex. The system established one-way roads, highways dedicated exclusively to supply trucks moving toward the front, and separate routes for empty vehicles returning for reloading. This eliminated the congestion of two-way traffic and maximized the flow of critical materials. Military police monitored key intersections, giving absolute priority to Red Ball convoys over all other traffic, even other military vehicles. Yet as planners rushed to implement this emergency system, they immediately encountered another crisis. Where would they find enough qualified drivers to operate hundreds of trucks around the clock? The rapid advance had stretched personnel resources to their limits. Combat units needed every available soldier at the front. Yet without drivers, those same units would soon be stranded without ammunition or fuel. This driver shortage forced military leadership into a controversial decision with far-reaching implications. They turned to the segregated units of African-American soldiers, troops who had been systematically excluded from combat roles under the military's racial policies, but who possessed the necessary skills to keep the supply lines moving. The decision exposed the fundamental contradiction in America's wartime stance, fighting against Nazi racial ideology while maintaining segregation within its own military. As the Red Ball Express took shape, it would become both a critical lifeline for Allied forces and a stark illustration of the paradoxes within American society. What began as a temporary emergency measure quickly transformed into one of the war's most crucial operations. Without the Red Ball Express, the Allied advance would have ground to a halt within days, potentially extending the war by months or years and costing countless additional lives. The constant flow of supplies allowed commanders to maintain pressure on retreating German forces, preventing them from establishing new defensive lines or regrouping for counterattacks. While military strategists celebrated the Red Ball Express as an operational triumph, they rarely mentioned who actually drove those trucks. The cold statistical reality reveals an astonishing pattern. African-American soldiers made up a staggering 75% of Red Ball Express drivers, despite constituting merely 10% of the total U.S. military personnel during World War II. This dramatic imbalance reflected something far deeper than random assignment. It exposed the systematic segregation policies that shaped every aspect of military service. The U.S. military of the 1940s operated as a microcosm of America's racial hierarchy. Black soldiers faced severe limitations on their roles and opportunities from the moment they entered service. Military leadership, mirroring civilian prejudices, deemed African Americans unsuitable for combat positions based on deeply flawed racial theories. Instead, black servicemen were disproportionately assigned to what the military categorized as service roles: cooking, cleaning, building, and transportation. This segregation created an unintended consequence that would prove crucial during the supply crisis. With black soldiers receiving training primarily focused on these service positions, the military had inadvertently created a substantial pool of personnel with driving and mechanical skills. When the urgent need for drivers arose, military leadership turned to this ready-made workforce they themselves had created through discriminatory policies. The irony of this situation was not lost on the drivers themselves. They recognized the fundamental contradiction in being deemed unsuitable for combat, while simultaneously being thrust into extremely dangerous supply routes essential to the war effort. In the diary of driver James Rookard, this awareness comes through with painful clarity. They didn't want us fighting Germans, but they needed us to keep the white boys supplied. Many of these drivers brought valuable civilian experience that enhanced the operation's effectiveness. Former mechanics could diagnose engine problems quickly, while those with previous trucking experience navigated challenging terrain with greater skill. These capabilities, present because of pre-war civilian experience rather than military training, proved indispensable to maintaining the constant flow of supplies. The military's segregation policies had inadvertently created precisely the workforce needed for this critical mission. Black soldiers, denied opportunities in combat roles, received training and assignments that positioned them as the solution to one of the war's most pressing logistical challenges. When the Allied advance threatened to stall due to supply shortages, the very soldiers the military had marginalized became essential to continuing the push toward Germany. This situation exemplifies what historians now recognize as a recurring pattern throughout American military history. Racial barriers temporarily relaxed when military necessity demanded it, only to be reinforced once the crisis passed. The Red Ball Express represents a clear case where pragmatic needs temporarily outweighed but never eliminated discriminatory practices. For many black drivers, this contradictory experience, being simultaneously essential yet marginalized, forged a powerful determination to challenge the status quo upon returning home. Their wartime service, despite the discrimination they faced, instilled a profound sense of pride, capability, and resolve. Having risked their lives to support an army that segregated them, many veterans returned with a strengthened commitment to fight for equal rights and recognition. The same men who had navigated treacherous supply routes under enemy fire would later navigate the challenging terrain of America's civil rights struggle. Their military service provided not just skills and discipline, but also a powerful moral argument. Having fought to defend democracy abroad, they were determined to secure it at home. This connection between wartime service and post-war activism represents one of the most significant yet often overlooked legacies of the Red Ball Express. The military's classification of these drivers as non-combat personnel created one of WWII's most dangerous contradictions. When trucks became priority targets for German forces, these supposedly safe service roles transformed into death-defying missions. The reality on the ground bore little resemblance to the sanitized terminology in military records. German military strategists weren't fools. They recognized that crippling Allied supply lines could potentially halt the entire advance across Europe. The Red Ball Express routes became prime strategic targets in a deliberate campaign to break the Allied momentum. Every truck that failed to reach the front meant fewer bullets, less fuel, and diminished rations for combat units pushing toward Germany. The driver's daily experience was far from the support role designation on their paperwork. Routes frequently passed within miles of active combat zones, where the distinction between frontline and rear echelon blurred into meaninglessness. When German aircraft appeared overhead, the driver's training kicked in. Trucks scattered from neat convoys into roadside vegetation, drivers desperately seeking cover beneath trees or in ditches, while tracers cut through the darkness. To meet the relentless delivery schedules, many drivers took extraordinary risks. They removed the governors from their truck engines, devices designed to limit vehicle speed, enabling them to push their vehicles far beyond recommended specifications. These unofficial modifications delivered the crucial extra speed needed to minimize exposure in dangerous areas, but dramatically increased the likelihood of catastrophic mechanical failures. William Dabney's account reveals the physically punishing nature of the work. We drive 36 hours straight, catch a few hours sleep under the truck, then go again. This punishing schedule was standard procedure, not an exception. The human cost of such relentless operation manifested in accidents, illness, and a level of physical and mental exhaustion that rivals any combat deployment. The technical challenges alone would have broken less determined personnel. Tires designed for normal loads regularly failed under the weight of critical supplies packed to maximum capacity. Engines seized after continuous operation in all weather conditions. Transmissions ground themselves to metal shavings on the steep grades of rural French roads. When mechanical failures occurred, as they inevitably did, drivers couldn't simply call for roadside assistance. They developed a remarkable repertoire of field repairs using whatever materials they could find. Leather belts repurposed as fan belts kept engines cooling when originals snapped. Common soap became an emergency sealant for radiator leaks. These improvised solutions meant the difference between completed deliveries and stranded, vulnerable targets for enemy forces. The dangers intensified at night when blackout conditions were enforced. Drivers navigated narrow, unfamiliar roads with headlights extinguished, relying on their instincts in the dim glow of cat-eye lights, tiny slits that emitted minimal illumination, visible only at close range. The slightest navigational error could send a fully loaded truck careening off the road or into other vehicles. When German aircraft spotted a convoy, the response had to be immediate. Drivers trained to rapidly disperse their vehicles, seeking whatever cover the landscape provided. These were the actions of combat personnel in all but official designation, men making split-second decisions under enemy fire that determined whether vital supplies would reach their destination. The physical impact was severe. Extended periods behind the wheel with minimal rest led to widespread exhaustion-related injuries and illness. The psychological toll of operating under constant threat, while technically classified as non-combat, created a cognitive dissonance that many drivers carried throughout their lives. This systematic downplaying of the dangers faced by Red Ball Express personnel did more than just miscategorize their service. It contributed to the broader historical erasure of African-American contributions to the war effort. By classifying these hazardous missions as routine transport duties, military records diminished both the skill required and the courage displayed by those who drove these routes. For decades, the Red Ball Express remained a footnote in standard World War II histories. Now, military historians are re-examining this crucial operation, acknowledging its strategic significance in ways previous generations of scholars did not. This shift represents a broader trend in historical research, recognizing contributions from groups whose stories were systemically marginalized. As we uncover these hidden narratives, we're forced to confront uncomfortable questions about whose experiences become official history. The drivers of the Red Ball Express didn't just deliver supplies, they delivered evidence that America's understanding of its own military triumphs has been selectively curated, leaving crucial chapters untold and vital contributors unacknowledged. Finally, don't forget to subscribe, comment, and share to show your support. Every click helps crack open the next vault. This is Tales from the Time Vault.